Kia ora ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Morena, good morning everybody. It is good to see you all looking so happy and healthy and alive here today. I want to acknowledge the barocca on the table for that. I also want to acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, and the Honourable Phil Twyford. Jacinda mentioned that in the atmosphere of the sort of borderline Manchester disco that we have here, that we could be a band, and if we were to be a band, my favoured title is Jacinda and the Builders, because that is exactly what this government is planning on doing. I want to talk about three main things today. I will talk about the work we're doing around financing and funding mechanisms, but I also want to, by way of introduction to Minister Jones this afternoon, talk a little bit about how we're organising ourselves in government to make sure that we can deliver on the infrastructure agenda that we share as being so important. But I do want to start with where the Prime Minister left off in many ways, which is around the purpose of what we're doing. Because from the perspective of this government, while it's vitally important we have a pipeline of infrastructure, that you are clear about what we're doing, we all have to understand the purpose for that. And our first budget in 2018 actually is very similar to the theme of this conference. We called it Foundations for the Future. It is vitally important that we build a society and an economy that is resilient and adaptable to the rapid pace of change in our world. This is a government that is committed to transitioning and transforming our economy to one that is more productive, more sustainable, and more inclusive. That means grasping the challenges of a rapidly changing world of work, where technology through artificial intelligence and robotics changes rapidly the world of work every single day. One where we know that the workforce needs to be able to train and retrain throughout its working life. And so that focus on improving productivity, at which infrastructure lies at the heart, is for a higher purpose of ensuring that New Zealand continues to have an economy that delivers good quality, high-wage jobs. The second major challenge, and the Prime Minister mentioned this as well, is our transition to a low-carbon economy. It is essential for New Zealand, not just because we must play our part in the world and for the agreements that we have signed up to, but because it is New Zealand's value proposition to be a clean, green country, to be a country that values the environment and the economy together. That transition must be a just transition that brings industries and communities with us as we reach our goal of a net zero emission economy by 2050. Good quality infrastructure sits at the heart of achieving that goal as well. And then thirdly, an economy where no one is left behind, where we ensure that the infrastructure we build, the projects we develop, are ones that reach right across New Zealand. Whether you live in the provinces or whether you live in the cities, a good quality of life should be available to all New Zealanders. Those three big challenges are the core of our approach to the economy, meeting those and lifting the living standards and well-being of all New Zealanders. We are taking some different approaches to both how we create our budgets and how we measure our success to ensure that that long-term goal of lifting and improving the well-being of all our people is at the heart of everything we do. So Budget 2018 was the first of the foundational budgets to work towards those goals. I see it as the first of a trilogy. My officials wouldn't let me call it A New Hope, so I had to stick with Foundations for the Future, but we will build from where we have begun today. So when we think about infrastructure in the context of that set of projects and that purpose, it was disconcerting for the government on coming into office to discover the gaps in both our knowledge of infrastructure, but also what to do about meeting the challenges. Early on, Treasury notified us of the pressure on the government's investment pipeline. The capital allowances for budgets 2015, 16 and 17 were oversubscribed by 313%, then 358%, and then 448% respectively. The Treasury told us its pipeline is only 50 to 70% accurate in terms of predicting new capital required over the near term, i.e. the next 12 months. So while we know that there is significant short-term demand for infrastructure, Even short-term planning was uncertain for us. And looking out over the longer term, we found that the National Infrastructure Unit in Treasury has been unable to put a dollar figure on the size of the infrastructure funding gap. This is not good enough, and we have to address it. We do rely on data submitted by agencies and local governments on their long-term plans and infrastructure strategies to anticipate expected capital pressures. However, this data is gathered periodically and is not always up to date or necessarily accurate. The other factor behind uncertainty in the infrastructure gap is that our infrastructure needs are not fully known. Individual government agencies themselves do not necessarily know their own infrastructure needs. And then we come to local government, where we have had even poorer line of sight from central government to the needs that are there. So these are the challenges that we need to face up to. None of them are new to any of you in the room. So the first task we had was how we organised ourselves to approach these issues. And you've already heard from Phil Twyford, the Honourable Phil Twyford at this conference. It was a very deliberate decision by the Prime Minister to appoint Phil as both the Minister of Housing and Urban Development and Transport. We cannot see those issues separately. They are part of how we create the most livable country in the world. Phil is getting a reputation, as one of his colleagues calls him, Ben-Hur, because everything is bigger than Ben-Hur, but there's nothing bigger than Phil Twyford. And Phil's work on the urban growth agenda and the establishment of the Urban Development Authority, which he told you about yesterday, is one of the most significant changes in the way we plan our urban environments, and he deserves great credit for having driven that forward. Along with Kiwi Build, the development of public housing and the GPS, and then in turn the ATAP plan, you see the core of the development of New Zealand's cities, towns and regions in an integrated manner. Equally, the appointment of Shane Jones as Minister of Infrastructure and Minister of Regional Economic Development was also no accident at all. And I'm very pleased, having oversight of this area of work, to have a minister focused on infrastructure. It's a portfolio that's previously been held by the Minister of Finance, but I'm very proud of the fact that we're working as a team to resolve this with a minister so closely focused on it. In many ways, Jacinda, Phil and myself are like an elaborate curtain raiser for Shane this afternoon. As many of you know, the champion of the regions and the first citizen of the provinces, as he calls himself, has a big announcement to make this afternoon. It's rapidly becoming the worst kept secret in New Zealand politics, but it's one I know that you'll appreciate and enjoy. Alongside us, the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta is leading our work in local government. The inquiry that the Productivity Commission is undertaking into local government is essential. We need to be able to understand the cost escalation and pressures that local government is facing, and be able to look at the financing and funding mechanisms that will best support local government. Nanaia's work on the Three Waters Review has been essential to our progress, and it is integrated into our overall work program. And her trip recently to Scotland, I know, has informed a lot of her work. Alongside all of those is Jenny Salisa, our Minister of Building and Construction, who is leading our work in the regulatory framework around the industry and to ensure that we address the issues that have emerged, particularly in the vertical construction sector. And then there's me, the one with the money, or not, as the case may be. The case is we have some money, and I'll talk about that now. But that team of ministers is working with you, and particularly with Infrastructure New Zealand, to ensure that our response is both integrated but also looks far to the future. I hope that that is a team that you are seeing and hearing a lot of, and I want to assure you today it is a team that is working together to ensure that we meet the goals that we have set for ourselves. So then we come to the issue of funding and financing. And it would be fair to say that having been faced with the issues that I mentioned earlier, it is now time for us to look at our innovative approaches to dealing with that. All of you will know, and the Prime Minister's already mentioned, that the government is committed to a large-scale investment of our own in infrastructure. $42 billion over 5 years for capital projects, $10 billion more than the previous government had planned. That is a contribution we know we need to make and will always be an important core of how we develop our infrastructure needs. But in addition to that, we have given Housing New Zealand and the New Zealand Transport Agency the ability to leverage their balance sheets to do what they do best, build houses and build our transport infrastructure. Around $4 billion additional is available to Housing New Zealand to develop their portfolio of work off the core Crown balance sheet. Both Housing New Zealand and NZTA know what they're doing. We need to support them to make sure that they can go ahead and do it. Beyond that, we want to continue to marshal capital from the private sector. In particular, we want to make sure that we marshal capital that is out there in the world that wants to have a home in New Zealand with a reliable project with a reliable revenue stream. You've already heard from Phil Twyford about the ways in which we're developing that. Treasury is leading the work on new models of financing, which we will be working through with you. You've already heard from Minister Twyford about the further development of Crown Infrastructure Partners. And I do want to note just at this point my congratulations to Crown Infrastructure Partners for winning the Change for National Infrastructure Awards for their UFB program. What we're now doing is building on the work of the previous government to ensure that Crown Infrastructure Partners can now play its role in that wider urban development agenda. We're close to fruition in terms of the first project, and I thank you for your patience as we get proof of concept for how we can leverage more private capital, how we can provide more reliable revenue streams to you to ensure that this development works. It is exciting to think about the way that we can structure debt and private financing so that we deliver on core infrastructure and spread across generations the way that we pay for that. The further development of special purpose vehicles will continue, as will other forms of financing that is available to us. In my remaining time, I just want to speak to you about another way that we can help provide certainty. And that certainty comes from the way that the government organises itself when it comes to our capital allowances. I mentioned earlier in the speech that the capital allowance oversubscription rates from the previous three budgets. My experience from running the coalition government's first budget is that New Zealand's current annual allowance structure in terms of how we allocate capital from government incentivises an overly short-term view of the government's capital investment strategy. It means that trade-offs are made between the initiatives submitted in a single year rather than based on medium or long-term view of the likely capital investment requirements for the government over the next 3, 5 or even 10 years. The trade-offs governments are forced to make each budget can mean not being able to give the construction industry or those doing business with government certainty that some projects will go ahead in the near future. Earlier this month, I said in a speech that we were looking at how we could provide more certainty about capital allocation across budgets. I can tell you today that the Treasury is working on improving how not only our Crown assets are planned, but also the funding pipeline as well. And this very much includes looking at how we can responsibly bring in multi-year capital allowances for the government to give greater certainty over what capital investment is required and available over the medium and long term. This will also give certainty about government's ability to meet any short-term fiscal targets we've set and provide greater clarity on the capital investment pipeline that the government can afford to fund. I won't go into any further detail today, other than to say to you that the work is underway and that when we do go down this track, I envisage a model that will be sufficiently flexible to meet our long-term objectives while ensuring that our near-term fiscal targets can be achieved. And we will have the ability to see further ahead and plan further ahead for the government's contribution. Working alongside the announcement that Minister Jones will make this afternoon, that will be a package of certainty. A package of certainty about what government will bring to the table, a package of certainty about the tools that are available to finance future developments in infrastructure, and a package of certainty about the way that the government will organise itself so that you, the industry, have not only a clear view of the pipeline, not only a clear view of the funding, but also a clear view of the purpose of investment in infrastructure. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.